The overall situation in Eastern Europe has just witnessed a shocking, historic turning point, a wake-up call for flawed strategic calculations. Moscow, the central seat of power once deemed Russia's invulnerable sanctuary, is now engulfed in the smoke and fire of fierce retaliatory strikes. This is no longer the war of attrition confined within Ukrainian territory from 2022. Entering 2026, the very nature of the conflict has completely transformed. As the flames of war officially blow back into the sanctuary of its instigator, we are witnessing a tragic yet epic new chapter in modern military history, where the hunter has now become the prey, and the Kremlin has no one to blame but its own decisions. To understand the root cause of this firestorm, analysts need to look back at the tragedy that unfolded on May 15th. The Russian military unleashed a devastating rain of bombs and ammunition lasting over 40 hours across Ukraine's urban areas, marking one of the largest airstrikes since the outbreak of the war. The heart of the tragedy lay in the capital city of Kyiv, where a long-range missile slammed directly into a 9-story apartment building of innocent civilians. That ruthless bombardment claimed the lives of at least 25 people and injured hundreds of others. Heartbreakingly, among the 25 victims killed in this building, responders recovered the bodies of 3 innocent children aged just 12, 15, and 17. Their lives were cut short before they could even cross the threshold of adulthood. This brutal war crime fueled the flames of hatred and shaped an uncompromising retaliation. Yet, there is a core geopolitical reality that Russian leadership completely miscalculated: Ukraine's current capacity for strategic autonomy. Kyiv is no longer dependent on nods of approval or restrictive red lines drawn by Washington or Europe. Ukraine and OPOS's domestic defense industry has undergone a massive transformation, allowing them to independently produce highly destructive long-range weapons and freely open fire on any target they choose. Immediately after the barrage of Russian bombs and missiles ceased, President Zelensky ordered defense forces to prepare a response plan that was militarily proportionate but carried supreme political deterrence. Strategic data shows that the Russian side deployed over 3,000 kamikaze drones, 1,300 guided glide bombs, and 74 cruise missiles to attack Ukrainian civilians during the darkest week since 2022. It was this staggering pressure that forced Kyiv to unleash an unprecedented thunderbolt. The deluge of drones rained down on Moscow for exactly 48 hours, a perfect temporal mirroring and a direct warning message sent to Putin personally. For the first time in over 80 years, since World War II, residents of the Russian capital had to witness an aerial assault of such a massive and comprehensive scale. Theoretically, Moscow is protected by a fortified, multi-layered air defense system consisting of 4 concentric defensive rings, offering the Russian elite an absolute sense of security. However, that heavily fortified system was completely overwhelmed by Ukraine and OPOS's swarm tactics. Thousands of drones blanketed the sky, piercing through the shields amid the utter panic of local residents. Furthermore, according to analytical reports, it was the Russian air defense systems themselves that, in their chaotic interception efforts, accidentally struck high-rise buildings and luxury apartment complexes belonging to oligarchs, turning heavily guarded areas into active battlegrounds. From the perspective of observers, the psychological impact of this attack on Russian society is immense. Even though Russian law strictly prohibits filming and distributing footage of air defense operations, traumatized and panicked Moscow residents posted thousands of video clips on the internet. From terrified screams along the Yaza River to footage of drones roaming freely in the sky, it all inadvertently became invaluable open-source intelligence, helping the Ukrainian military assess damage and optimize subsequent waves of strikes. The Russian Ministry of Defense admitted they had to strain to intercept more than 1,000 drones in a single day, an unprecedented number in the 4-year history of the conflict. The overall outcome was truly staggering, as Ukrainian operational forces claim to have destroyed a strategic network of 46 high-value Russian military targets and naval assets. The Moscow elite, who had always stood on the sidelines of the war, have now tasted the harsh reality that no one is safe anymore once the flames of war officially knock on every door. The skies over the capital city of Moscow witnessed total paralysis when a drone crashed right next to the runway of Sheremetyevo International Airport, one of Russia's largest aviation gateways. Fiery images captured the scene of a blaze erupting directly in front of rows of parked aircraft, triggering a complete lockdown of the entire regional infrastructure. Inside the terminal, the once bustling spaces became deserted. Check-in counters sat silently closed. Not a single passenger was in sight, and all flights were canceled. The panic reached a crescendo through an audio recording of a woman living right next to the airfield, who witnessed the firestorm descending on Sheremetyevo firsthand in utter helplessness and exhaustion. Yet, this attack exposed a deep geopolitical paradox. For the past 2 years, the Kremlin has deployed a wide-area GPS jamming system across the country to protect core targets. This technological interference turned Moscow into a blind labyrinth, leaving tourists crying in the middle of the street because their phones completely lost navigation capabilities. And it was this very technological shield that ironically backfired. When the Ukrainian drones encountered signal suppression, they lost control and plunged freely anywhere, turning Russia and Oppos's own defense system into a direct cause of random fires right at aviation infrastructure sites. Just as happened at Sheremetyevo. Fear quickly spread like an invisible epidemic into every corner of the Russian capital, shattering all illusions of a safe home front. Authentic footage captured Moscow residents scrambling to pack their bags and rushing to their cars to flee the city in utter shock. In high-rise buildings, stairwells became makeshift shelters for hundreds of trembling people hiding from the scythe of death. More tragically, the chaos within the Russian air defense network led to fatal, self-inflicted mistakes. In a desperate and futile attempt to bring down the targets, interceptor missile systems misfired and plunged directly into the apartment buildings of their own citizens. This bitter event was filmed and verified by local residents on social media platforms, with the most vivid evidence being a horrific explosion that destroyed a portion of building number 11, located directly across from the apartment complex of a citizen named Nikita. Shrapnel from the Russian air defense missiles embedded itself into civilian homes, turning the living spaces of the elite into a battlefield filled with debris and smoke. Parallel to these collateral damages, Ukraine and Oppos's campaign was in fact a series of surgical strikes with extreme strategic precision aimed at the core economic and military lifelines of the adversary. A single drone penetrated one of the most heavily fortified defense networks to crash directly into the Kapotnya refinery located right in Moscow, a strategic facility owned by the energy giant Gazprom. With a massive capacity of approximately 245,000 barrels of oil per day, this facility supplies up to 40% of the fuel required for the entire capital and Oppos's needs. The fact that a single aircraft could bypass thick layers of shields and cause hundreds of millions of dollars in damage dealt a fatal blow to Russia and Oppos's military pride. But the flames did not stop there. A massive fire, visible from miles away, incinerated a strategic fuel depot in the village of Durakino in the Moscow suburbs. At the same time, the Ukrainian military demonstrated superior multi-domain operational capabilities by simultaneously launching attacks across land, air, and sea. From striking a patrol boat of the Russian Federal Security Service as far away as the port city of Kaspiysk on the shores of the distant Caspian Sea, to neutralizing an advanced air defense system in Luhansk province, destroying the communications center of the Black Sea Fleet on the Crimea Peninsula, and flattening a series of core command headquarters. The situation has completely reversed as the one who used to sow fear is now frantically searching for a place to hide. Russia cannot unilaterally dictate the end of this war just because the opponent has begun to counterattack, for they themselves were the ones who ignited the flames of conflict. This is the worst nightmare the Russian people have ever had to face, a tragic role reversal of fate. Throughout 4 long years of conflict, Russia has been accustomed to raining bombs and shells down on Ukraine with near impunity, while Kyiv and Oppos's previous retaliatory strikes were merely symbolic and disproportionate. Now, the justice of war has knocked on Moscow and Oppos's door with a fair and square answer. The horror was deeply etched in the words of an eyewitness when she woke up at 4:00 and Oppos's clock in the morning to a buzzing sound tearing through the air right above her roof, accompanied by columns of pitch-black smoke rising from the forest on a hill just a 3-minute drive away. Amid the bone-chilling cold of the capital and Apos' night, that woman could only wrap herself in a blanket and tremble, keeping her clothes on as she helplessly awaited her fate. When the sound of aircraft engines reappeared, signaling the temporary reopening of Sheremetyevo Airport, people would rather hear the roar of aviation engines than endure those heart-wrenching explosions. Closing this shocking campaign, the commander of Ukraine and Apos' drone forces sowed terror into the Russian mindset with a Moscow that never sleeps. The true turning point of the conflict does not just lie in the pitch-black columns of smoke in the skies over the Moscow region, but it is cracking the very foundations of the Kremlin and Apos' diplomatic posture. Immediately following the shocking wave of strikes on May 17th, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov unexpectedly broadcast a message stating that the Russian side is highly interested in restoring the dialogue process with Ukraine. This was a calculated move aimed at soothing international public opinion, appearing at the exact moment when Russia and Apos' seat of power was vulnerable. However, this call for a truce was merely a diplomatic mask facing outward. For Russian citizens in the interior regions, a thick curtain of information was erected to conceal the harsh reality. On Russian state television channels, viewers saw only victorious reports praising air defense forces for successfully repelling one of the largest drone attacks since the beginning of the special military operation. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin himself enthusiastically announced that air defense shields had shot down more than 120 kamikaze drones within 24 hours. But there was an ironic truth that mainstream media deliberately ignored. While they claimed successful interceptions, oil refineries and core industrial complexes continued to burn, pushing the gap between propaganda and reality into a deep chasm. It was this forced distortion of reality that ignited a wave of resentment right within Russia, as prominent military bloggers, who were once ardent supporters of Putin and Apos' campaign, now turned their backs on the Kremlin and Apos' propaganda machine. Romanov, one of the most influential military analysts and bloggers in Russia, used the bitterest sarcasm to expose the lies of the local authorities. After debris from Ukrainian kamikaze drones struck Azot, the largest chemical industrial complex in southern Russia, creating a horrific fire visible from dozens of miles away, the regional governor still casually declared that no damage had occurred. Romanov bitterly wrote that if citizens happened to see something completely contradictory to announcements from official sources, it would be best not to believe their own eyes, but to place their absolute trust in the reports of the government. This situation revives the famous quote from George Orwell and Apos' work, stating that the party and Apos' final and most essential command was to force people to reject the evidence of their eyes and ears. Now, Russian leadership is demanding that its citizens close their eyes and cover their ears to a bitter truth. This war has completely veered off its planned trajectory. On the other side of the front line, Ukraine and Apos' declaration carried a tragic yet ironclad tone regarding a historic retribution. President Volodymyr Zelensky affirmed to the international community that the long-range punishment rained upon the Moscow region was a completely justified and legitimate act of retaliation, given Russia and Apos' continuous prolongation of the war and its sowing of grief across Ukrainian cities. Overcoming a distance of more than 500 kilometers from the border, equivalent to about 300 miles, Ukrainian aircraft penetrated the densest and most heavily fortified air defense network in the world in the Russian capital to hit their targets, proving the remarkable advancement of domestic missile and drone manufacturers. This attack sends an ultimatum that the ticket to a peaceful life for the Russian people has been officially revoked by the strategic blunders of the Kremlin. To save the situation and preserve their destiny, the only choice left for Russian leadership is to end the war and withdraw all troops back to their country. The war is returning to where it began, and at this moment, the art of knowing how to withdraw alone with honor is far more important than hypocritical dialogue efforts at the negotiating table.